You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 325 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's great to be back.
It is a beautiful, hot day here in Chicago, and the Cubs they've wrapped up a homestand. They are out of town in Detroit. We will preview the upcoming series here with the Tigers and the week that will be. But first, we're going to recap the week that was. We're going to talk a little prospects, and we're going to talk news. And to help us break down all things Cubs, longtime friend of the show, you know him from his baseball writings all over the place and Twitter as well. Michael Ernst, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Thanks for having me on again.
Well, let's start with the good news. This past weekend, let's go back to since last we podcasted. Last time we podcasted, we were very bullish on this week, as this is the stretch of the Cubs' schedule where they need to pile up the wins. This is the time where the Brewers have a tough stretch, Cubs have a fairly easy stretch. And we expect to see lots of victories. So we were looking at the week and predicting of the 5-game homestand. We were hoping for a 4-1, worst case 3-2 week, and that's what we got, Pat.
Yeah, we got the worst case. It was one of those weeks where you hoped for 4-1. It was definitely doable, but in reality, and I think you made a good point on the last podcast, with the first 2 games being White Sox games, and with all the White Sox jazz, going on always, splitting those is after winning the first 2 on the South Side, splitting these 2 seemed to probably make sense in kind of like baseball, being baseball kind of ways. And then the question was, could we sweep Kansas City or not? And the answer is we could have. But we didn't. So, but yeah, I mean, actually, the Christopher Morel really saved the day on that second Sox. And can you imagine Cubs Twitter had the Cubs been swept by the Sox and he had not hit that 9th inning game-winning home run on the 0-2 pitch, and then had lost the first game to Kansas City and had lost the first 3 games of the week, it would have been on DEFCON 4 probably at that point. He really saved us quite a bit of pain and consternation. And the Cubs ended up winning 3 out of 5. I think the Brewers won 3 out of 6. Now, they had a much more difficult schedule playing at Dodgers and at the Texas Rangers. But all things considered, it worked out fine. Like, we're no worse for the wear, I don't think.
Yeah, Michael, this... If it wasn't for Christopher Morel, it would have been a rough start to the week and maybe a slightly different tone to this podcast, especially with these victories against Kansas City. Not super convincing. Kansas City a little more, a little tougher than I anticipated seeing the Cubs get played this weekend.
Yeah, well, a lot of things would be worse without Christopher Morel, so that's just
true.
That's easy for me to cope with. Hey, they're going to lose the games to teams like Kansas City and the White Sox on occasion. It's going to happen. They're not going to play perfect ball against bad teams down the stretch. And, like you said, they came away with what they needed to out of these series. Yeah, you'd always like to have a little more, but, they just they've got to keep from going on a losing streak. That's the one thing they need to hold off on. If they can prevent that, they should be in good shape. I still feel like they are a better team than a couple of teams in front of them and a couple of teams that are chasing them. So just stop the massive losing streak that you just can't get out of. And, a lot of that's going to come down to the pitching. That's what's been failing them more often than not over the last few weeks. And, obviously with the Stroman news and that, there's not going to be a lot of help on the way. So the guys that they have need to step up. It's up to the veterans. And, obviously, a guy like Assad's doing great, but he's not going to be the guy that they should need to lean on right now. It's on Steele, it's on Hendricks, it's on Tyon. Those three guys, one of them needs to emerge as a stopper, or at least one of them. It'd be helpful if two of them can. And if you can get two of those three guys pitching well, and you can even throw Smiley in there if he ends up going back into the rotation. You need a couple of those guys pitching well and stop those losing streaks. And I'm pretty confident that if they can do that, they'll be fine for the playoffs, to get into the playoffs. I don't know about in the playoffs, but they can get to the playoffs that way.
So you made a good point, and I had forgotten to mention, in addition to losing that first White Sox game, the news breaking that Marcus Stroman was out indefinitely, probably for the rest of the year, at least the regular season. Also coinciding with that Morel night, that really would have been a disaster to lose your ace pitcher and 2 games to the White Sox in a row like that. But I'm curious to hear from you, Michael. See, I have a slightly different take on this, which is, I do think that the veterans need to step up and play well. But I also think the Cubs are going to need to get something out of their younger players down the stretch in order to win the division. Maybe not to make the playoffs, but to win the division. I just feel that there are enough holes in this rotation and bullpen and lineup that I think we're going to need somebody to kind of do something. And you're sort of the prospect expert, I guess. And so my question to you is, when we look at leaving aside for the immediate minute, leaving aside the minor leagues, like just looking at who is on this major league roster at any one time, do you think, what's your take on the Hayden Wisniewski situation, a guy who pitched really well down the stretch last year? Boy, if we get those innings back, and then great in spring training and has really struggled at the major league level this season. Obviously it may be too much to ask for him to have, a comeback here, but either as a bullpen piece or out of the rotation, it sure would be nice to get some quality innings from him in September.
Yeah, obviously with Stroman being out and Assad already in the rotation, having replaced Smiley.
And pitching quite well.
Yeah. And I do feel pretty confident in Assad. As far as young players go, he seems to have the right mentality. He's always been a guy that's had good command. So, he's not often going to beat himself. He's going to force the other team to string together hits or, hit a bunch of home runs or whatever. Wisniewski is a little bit different. There is platoon issues with him that have always been present. He put it together pretty well for a few weeks at the end of last season. But those issues have cropped back up a little bit. It's a lot like we saw with Tyon in the first half of the year, where left-handers were just eating him alive. Tyon has made some adjustments and kind of gotten back on track. Wisniewski, I think it's more of a issue where, as a young pitcher, he hasn't developed that consistency where, I think he has a good enough cutter, and, he mixes in a 4-seam, a 2-seam, and a cutter, and that should be enough to prevent left-handers from, really getting to him a lot. But I think he has a tendency to not execute the cutter in particular as well as he needs to on a consistent basis. He basically hangs the cutter a lot, or his 4-seam fastball is pretty straight. So if he ends up having to rely on that too much, he's vulnerable to the home run ball in the big inning if especially if there's a lot of left-handers that he's facing. So
to your point, he's faced left-handed batters 130 times this season. He walked 11 of them, 119 official at-bats, of which lefties have been OPS of 1.032, which is sort of like Albert Pujols at his peak.
exactly.
And they also have hit 12 home runs off of him in 119 at-bats, which is sort of Babe Ruthian. So everybody's Babe Ruth who bats left-handed against him this year sort of is where we're at, I guess.
Yeah, and like I said, Tyon was exactly the same way. However, with Tyon, you at least had the comfort that he had been platoon neutral throughout basically his entire career. The left-handed issues that Tyon faced this year were something new as the Cubs kind of messed with his pitch mix a little bit, and I think he got a little bit out of his comfort zone. And it almost seemed like more of a psychological adjustment that he made in the second half. Whereas Wisniewski, I think it's a little more to do with the actual pitch movements and, like I said, the consistency of executing those pitches as often as he needs to. So I think long term he can figure it out. But I'm not exactly counting on him to figure it out in the next month and a half. So to me, I would go back to Drew Smyly before I turned to Wisniewski. I mean, I know Smyly has struggled the majority of the year, but like Tyon, he's a guy that does have a track record. And you just like to think that, he's had a nice little reset over the last few weeks here in the bullpen. I think he's looked pretty sharp in a couple of his latest outings. To me, he'd be more of the guy that I would turn back to to take the first shot at replacing Smyly. At replacing Stroman.
So let me throw out just a couple more names of guys who have been on the Major League roster at various points, and tell me if you expect or hope or think realistically we're going to get much out of any of these guys. Ready? The names are Brandon Hughes, who's coming off an injury, obviously. Keegan Thompson, who's coming off a mysterious drop in velocity. And then Caleb Killian, who has obviously command issues or has had at the major league level. And then Daniel Palencia. Like, of those four guys, realistically, what can we look forward to in the last 5 weeks?
I mean, Hughes, I really can't speak to. I mean, that's 100% health related. Would
that be a shot in the arm?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they could obviously use a left-handed option to help out Leiter down the stretch, because there's going to be back-to-back games where they're going to need a lefty, or an option against left-handed batters, and Leiter's not going to be able to pitch every day. So getting somebody like Hughes, even if it's just for like the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season, would be huge. And if he's healthy, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be able to contribute, as long as his command is sharp after such a long layoff. But again, it's kind of hard for me to say on that. As far as the other guys, Palencia, he's going to have good days. He's going to have bad days. So if you catch him on the right day, he's going to look like a stud. And if you catch him on a day when he's not throwing strikes, he's just the guy you got to take out after 3 batters. And hope whoever you bring in after him kind of can get you off the hook. But
sounds like kind of a mop-up man to me. But
yeah,
to me, for the rest of this year,
to me, it's more you use them in kind of the soft low or the soft high leverage situations. If you've got a 3 or 4 run lead, you can bring them in and kind of get you through. Or on occasion, you're going to have days where a couple of guys are down and you just need to plug somebody else in there and hope for the best. And like I said, with Palencia, it's kind of flip of a coin. If it's the right day and he's throwing strikes, he's going to get you through even in a high leverage situation. So I do think he's going to play, or he's going to factor in down the stretch. Keegan Thompson, I know he's put up decent numbers his last 6 or 7 outings, I think, in Iowa. But my word, he was bad the majority of the season. I mean, he just got his
So
ERA
weird.
under 10 in the last like week. So I really have a hard time believing in him figuring it out at the end of the year here, or where they would have any kind of confidence in him. I'm more just hopeful of a off-season reset there and hope for the best in spring training. But hey, I mean, if he strings to, I mean, there's still over a month left in the season, so he's had a good last week or 10 days. If he can put together another 2 or 3 good weeks, maybe he does become an option in September, which would be huge again. I mean, if he could get anything close to what he was doing last year, that obviously helps you out. But yeah, I confidence level in any of those 4 names that you just listed
and then Killian,
is
who
not high. Oh yeah, Killian. I just think.
Are we ever going to see Killian pitch at a Cubs at the major league level for the Cubs? You think, or do you think no at this point?
I mean, barring injury, I struggle to see it at this point. I do think he's got enough stuff to be a major league pitcher. To me, there seems to be like a little bit of a psychological block sort of thing where, he hasn't, when he comes up, he seems like a different guy than he does when he pitches in AAA. And I wonder if there's a little bit of that. Does he actually believe he's a big leaguer yet? And
well, he's turning 27 next year, so if he's going to be one,
exactly,
I guess now's the time.
I will say though, 10 years ago, I would have absolutely said, yeah, his chances are so low at this point, but you're seeing guys hold their velocity so much further into their 30s. They can develop new pitches now in their 30s, whereas 10, 20 years ago, you never saw somebody do that. Now it's like common occurrence all the time. Guys pick up velocity in their 30s sometimes. I mean, with Killian, all of a sudden he's been consistently throwing 97, 98, whereas we only saw that in spurts previously. So, I mean, he's a guy that, at 31 or 32, maybe he figures it out and he could still have 3 or 4 good years at that point.
For the Cubs, it's more of a roster crunch, like 40-man roster and options and things like that are probably hurt his
definitely.
career.
I mean, I think he goes into his last option year next year. Yeah. And I think if they run into a crunch with the roster in the offseason, he would definitely be a guy that they would consider DFAing. So, yeah.
Well, so if that list is disappointing, and there's not anyone on there that we see coming for September, what about a Jordan Wicks? Is that possible as a September call-up?
I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Like I said, I do think they will turn to Smiley and potentially Wisniewski first. But if one or both of those guys still struggle as the 5th starter, they really aren't going to have any other option than to turn to Jordan Wicks. And there's a lot of similarities with Javier Assad there. I think Wicks has the mentality. He has the command where, he can go out there and he's probably not going to lose the game for you. He's going to force the other team to beat him. And, he's not going to miss a lot of bats, but it's, the Cubs got a pretty good defense. So that's not a bad strategy to let the other team hit the ball and, force them to beat you, force them to find holes in the defense. So, yeah, I personally wouldn't hesitate to call him up if the other guys struggle, but I don't think he's going to be option 1 at this point because, they've been protecting him throughout the year a little bit, monitoring his innings because I think they were hoping that maybe he could be an option, later in the year here, and they didn't want to waste all his bullets early in the year. So I'm hoping, he's already passed the number of innings that he pitched last year. But that's okay. You want him to build up. So if they need to call upon him, I think he'll be ready. So, yeah, I definitely think he would be an option more so than some of the other names. And, honestly, at this point, with as long as Ben Brown has been out, He was really the only other prospect with potential to kind of start games. But he's been out, I want to say it's almost 5 weeks at this point. So even if he gets back on the mound in the next week or two, he's probably going to need another 2 or 3 weeks after that to build up, where he could actually be a starter again. So if he comes back, I think he would be more of a bullpen option than a starting pitcher option. And he could be a guy that, it's kind of like Palencia, where if he's throwing strikes, Ben Brown's going to be able to get major league hitters out, even in high leverage situations. So he could definitely be a help for the bullpen. But at this point, unless he gets back in the next week, maybe 10 days, I struggle to see him as a starting option. So at that point, you're just basically looking at Wicks.
Yeah, the Cubs will need help as the starting rotation is hurting down the stretch here. Justin Steele, who the Cubs are going to be counting on to continue to be Justin Steele for these remaining starts. He's already passed his career innings pitched. I was at the game on Saturday when he did pitch. He pitched 6 innings. And only gave up 2 runs. He looked tremendous still, so not a lot of fear yet. But man, it's one of those you're up against it with Steele, and you just hope he can hang on to what he's had so far. Because right now, so far, he's got to be in some of the Cy Young discussion for the National League.
Oh, yeah, I definitely think he's going to receive some votes. I don't know that he'll get any first place votes, but I would certainly expect at least a top 5, if not even potentially a top 3 finish out of him. But yeah, I mean, he's obviously pitching, pretty darn well. He had a couple of bumps in the road after the All-Star break, but like you said, his game on Saturday I thought was very encouraging. Hopefully coming, we can get out of some of the warm weather. We still probably got a couple more weeks of that, but I think he kind of struggled a little bit with that in the dog days of the summer there a little bit. Seemed like they were asking him to pitch longer than he probably was used to.
Isn't he from someplace hot, like Mississippi?
Yeah, I think he's from the South. Yeah, he's from the Gulf Coast. Yeah, it's you're still not used to that. You pitch in high school, you pitch in college, you do not throw the number of innings on a 5-day basis. And, that's a big thing that I think gets overlooked a lot with not just college starters that struggle to make the transition into the pros, but we even see it with Japanese starters where you start in college, you start in Japan, you throw once a week. So you've got 6 days off in between. So you've got a lot more time to recuperate, and you can be asked to throw more pitches because you do have that more time off to recover. But yeah, the every 5-day thing in North American pro ball it's a tough grind over a long season. So yeah, he's been nicked up a couple of times in the past. Last year, they obviously shut him down a little early. But yeah, they're going to be riding him hard with Stroman out. So yeah.
These last 5 weeks, he's been giving up a lot. Well, he's been giving up more hits than he had been earlier in the year, but thank God he doesn't walk anybody.
Right.
If anything, that's been a huge difference between the season this year and in previous years, is that he just doesn't walk anybody, which I'm totally 100% okay with.
Yeah. And, Assad is really kind of pitching in a similar fashion. He's doing it with more pitches than Steele, who famously just throws 2. But, Assad, he gives up a lot of contact, but they just never seem to really square him up great. And, that's allowed him to, he pitched 7 innings in his last start, or I think it was 7 innings. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that can potentially save the bullpen on some days, which is great, especially since he hasn't pitched that many innings this year. He's been in the bullpen most of the time. So he is a guy that shouldn't get tired down the stretch, I don't think.
Well, last point I want to touch on for this weekend's games, and then we'll shift to talking a little bit more about the offense and potentially some of the call-ups there. But yeah, at the game on Saturday, first of all, the Friday and Saturday games on the Air and Water Show weekend is a unique Wrigley Field experience, one of my favorite things to do. You get the flyovers throughout the game. You get the practice runs, and during the show, they come and the planes will buzz over the stadium. Really cool. If you haven't done it, highly recommend. It's a fun weekend to go see a game when the Cubs are in town for the Air and Water Show. This weekend was that. It was a ton of fun. The Saturday game, Cody Bellinger, he hit 2 home runs, and Candelario was all over the place, making tremendous defensive stops throughout that game, help backing up Justin Steele, and just a tremendous game for the Cubs, seeing what they can do on offense and defense from both Bellinger and Candelario. Looking at the Cubs September call-up possibilities, the person that everybody is keeping an eye on, everybody's asking about, is Pete Crow Armstrong someone that will make a September call-up, or do you think that they just kind of want to leave him alone for now down there in AAA?
I think, as it is with Wicks, I think they are hoping that the veterans can step up. They want Suzuki. They want to give Suzuki a couple more weeks to show he can still contribute.
He hit a home run over the weekend. He made a couple good plays. Yep.
Yeah,
I bet he hits one tonight, to be honest with you, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's been playing a little better, and if he reemerges as an actual threat at the plate, I struggle to see PCA having much playing time options because I don't think they're going to bench Tauchman. Bellinger's still going to play a little bit in the outfield. They're clearly never going to bench Happ at any point ever.
Or not have him bat third at any time.
Yeah,
apparently.
I mean, I'm certainly not vocal in that regard, as a lot of fans like to be. Why is he in it? But at the same time, they never not play him. So I think it's pretty clear that Ian Happ is going to be out there in left field basically every day. So that really only gives you center field and right field. And like I said, I think Tauchman is going to play quite a bit, and I think they want Suzuki to play quite a bit. So as long as those two hold up, that's pretty much going to leave a maybe defensive replacement, mostly pinch running role. And if you're just going to use a pinch runner, you might as well use Miles Mastrobuoni and not add PCA to the 40-man roster and then have to carry him all off season when that's not something that they're going to, they're not going to be forced into that through the Rule 5 draft or anything. They don't need to protect him this year. So if they don't see a fairly decent sized role for him, I wouldn't expect them to add him. But like I said, if anybody falters, if anybody gets hurt, I don't think they would hesitate 1 second to bring PCA.
So what about the idea of bringing up this guy who everybody was counting on coming into the season, Matt Mervis, who got a cup of coffee with the Cubs or 100 at-bats or whatever, and then was sent down to the minors and seems to be stuck there. I'm beginning to think that they must – I mean, if they don't bring him up at any point this year, I do kind of wonder, is he just not in their plans? Like, how can you – I know it's a difficult balancing act, right? Because on the one hand, you're in a playoff race, so you've got to try to win all your games. On the other hand, I would hate to go into the offseason and into next season not knowing whether he's a Major League Baseball player or not.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation for him, and it will make decision-making in the offseason more difficult.
I mean, they're playing Patrick Wisdom in lieu of him, sort of, right? Like with the Candelario swap back between first and third. Wisdom's getting a lot of those at bats, or Nick Madrigal is getting a lot of those at bats. So if they're valuing him below those guys, that's probably not a good sign.
Well, I mean, Patrick Wisdom outproduces him by twice as much compared to what Mervis did at the major league level. So I have a hard time seeing if they feel like they need an offensive boost, they're going to turn to Patrick Wisdom more than they would turn to Matt Mervis.
Right. And yet
they're
they
not
might
going to
DFA him at the end of the year. So what does that tell you about Mervis's
exactly
future?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's tough. 2020 hindsight, they should have brought up Mervis opening day, obviously, instead of Hosmer. That would have given him another month to hopefully have found his footing. But I mean, he got more than a month, and he struggled, and the Cubs were trying to save their season. They turned to somebody else as Mervis was struggling. Jared Young didn't do any better, but he was doing better in AAA than Mervis did, so they gave Young a shot instead. And then obviously that didn't work out as well, so they had to turn to Candelario. And to me,
don't forget Mancini. You missed the
yes.
the month of Mancini.
Yes. How could I forget?
Boy, your PTSD is not really serving you here.
That's not my finest hour. I was a proponent of signing him this offseason, but wow, that did not work out. That did not work out at all. He was done. I don't see a path for Mervis to get another shot this season, barring injury.
And again, he's on the 40-man roster. He turns 26 right after opening day. So
I think he can survive the offseason on the 40-man roster.
Okay.
I don't see them, or at least at the beginning of the offseason, I don't see them getting rid of him. Jared Young, he's even older. He also struggled. So I think he would be more of a victim on the 40 than Mervis.
You should definitely let Mervis know this, because I think it would put him at ease.
I mean, honestly, I don't think he's in danger in that way. Now, if they do end up making a big move this offseason, be it re-signing Coney Bellinger, re-signing Candelario, pursuing Ohtani, if they are bringing in a big corner infield, first baseman DH type, and sign them to a long-term contract, then they're in the same situation that they are right now, where Mervis doesn't really have a path. And at that point, I think they would trade him more than just, DFA him. I don't think DFA is in the cards for him this offseason.
So if Matt Mervis is in the lineup next year, everything's gone wrong. Good to know.
Well, or it's as expected. This ownership still has not gotten any trust from me that they're going to do any of those things that Michael just described.
I think they will. I really think they will. I realize that they are doing everything that they can to stay under the luxury tax this year for competitive reasons. There are ramifications for going over that multiple seasons in a row. And this was a season where they were trying to build up, coming out of their little mini rebuild. They weren't sure if they were going to be good enough. And so,
retool, by the way. They don't.
Yeah, retool, whatever you want to label it.
They made clear it was not a rebuild.
Yes. Whatever they want to label it. This was their season of hoping that they could compete again. Yeah. And when you're basing your season on hope, I can understand not pushing all of your chips in and making it harder to compete later on. Next year, I think they realize, especially with the hype that they've created in the second half of this year, where they didn't sell off guys and they added, and the fans are excited and Wrigley is energetic, there's going to be expectations. And they realize they cannot allow that momentum to, falter. So I do think at the bare minimum, Candelario will be back.
That's a good segue into the last piece of Cubs news to touch on here. The release of Tucker Barnhart. Pat, the Tucker Barnhart era here in Chicago is over, which, good news, that means more Miguel Amaya. And we saw him hit a home run this weekend as well, and he's always a fun player to watch play. But Pat, that's Mancini and Barnhart. A couple of the free agent signings from this season just didn't work out, and there'll be some dead money next season.
Yeah, I mean, that's $10 million right there. I will say that, much like Michael, I thought that the Mancini deal made sense. I guess in retrospect, I would have rather it have been a 1-year deal versus 2. But I thought that he could fill a gap there. Barnhart, however, I was, as you know, and I said on this podcast at the time, I was adamantly opposed to that idea, much because regardless of his defense, I just thought having a catcher with a slugging percentage, an on-base plus slugging percentage, in the 540-ish range, which is what he was before he got here and what he was while he was here, didn't seem in this lineup, which was already having its offensive issues, as we started the season, just didn't seem like a good fit. And then giving him that second year, also not great. So yeah, the Cubs will lose the Jason Hayward money at the end of the year, but between Mancini and Barnhart and if you want to throw it in Drew Smiley, I think that'll pretty much be the Hayward money. But I think it's a good move because I like the idea that they cut their losses, and it's something that they've had a hard time doing. And they've demonstrated this year with Hosmer, who wasn't really a financial loss, more of a sort of like a pride loss, I guess, for them. And then Mancini, now Barnhart, that there is a production requirement necessary in order to stay on the team. And I think that's important. And I was at the game Sunday, it wasn't even 2 hours. It was like an hour and 59 minutes, which was great because I brought my daughter and her friends. So it's just right about, for them, it was just about the right time span to keep their interest. But, Amaya hit the home run in that game that ended up, being a difference maker, which was nice. No, I think, let's see what we can get out of him the rest of this year. He's probably been the most pleasant surprise out of the farm system this year, which is funny to say because we've been talking about him for like 6 years. So the thought that he was a surprise, it got so bad that we had kind of like lost hope, I think, on him. It'd be like if Brennan Davis showed up one day and started like hitting 40 home runs or something. We'd be like, well, what happened? And, he hadn't caught in forever and with COVID and injuries, et cetera, et cetera. So having him back and performing has just been a real pick-me-up. That's the kind of thing, from younger players that I've been hoping for. And he's been the prime example of that. So I'm very pleased with that, and I think he and Gomes will make a good team the rest of the next 5 weeks. And from a roster standpoint, it makes sense because Barnard's roster spot could be better served with somebody else.
Are you sure they're going to know how to handle not having 3 catchers on the roster?
Yeah, or 4. Yeah. I'm still harkening back to the Luis Torrens day. So, it's been a lot of catchers this year. But, I mean, so far they use that roster spot, I think, on Mastrobuoni. Maybe they'll come up with an even better plan down the stretch here. But I was surprised that they cut Barnhart, but I applaud them for being aggressive in that area.
Yeah, Michael, it's great to see Amaya have success here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm personally more happy is a weird word, but encouraged, I guess, is the word that I'm looking for. I'm more encouraged that they let Mancini go than they let Barnhart go. With Barnhart, obviously, there's a clear transition into the Miguel Amaya era. He stayed healthy. He's played well at the major league level. He's a guy that they have wanted to emerge for a long time, but obviously injuries and that have kind of slowed that process. But with Barnhart, like I said, it's a clear transition. With Mancini, Mervis failed. Candelario is a free agent. Bellinger is a free agent. They have no first base DH option signed for next year other than an unproven Mervis. And so the fact that they were willing to cut ties with him, to me, I think speaks more to what you were saying, where, hey, production matters now more than it did in the past when they held on to guys like Descalzo for freaking ever.
Oh God.
And even last year with VR and
Simmons.
Thank you. I was blanking on his name.
Because he's out of baseball and you haven't heard it lately.
Right. I mean, they held on to those guys for about the same amount of time, but those were 1-year commitments. And they didn't have other options really. I mean, they had other guys that could play better probably, but they didn't have a guy like Amaya coming up to take those spots. With Mancini, it's like I said, it's kind of a similar situation, but hey, they cut ties. I love that. They admitted the mistake and you move on and you make the best of it. And so, yeah, I'm great with that. Very encouraged by Amaya. He's a guy that, has always gotten pretty good reviews as for his defensive work, much more so for his work with the pitchers. He seems to be a guy that they're comfortable throwing to. Obviously, with the amount of time that he's missed, I think there were some physical questions about whether he could hold up and, how would his arms respond after Tommy John's surgery. I think he's answered enough of that. I think he's shown, the arm strength is good enough. The mobility behind the plate is good enough. His framing has been really solid. So, if the physical questions have been answered, and I've always believed in the power and his patience at the plate, I think those will translate. I'm not 100% sure on the hit tool. I do think he could be a guy that ends up being more like a 220, 230 hitter, especially as a catcher where, you get dinged up a lot over the course of a season and you're very rarely close to playing at 100%. So I think there will be times where, he might hit 220, but he's going to still hit for power and get on base. So he's never going to be, a Tucker Barnhart at the plate, where it's just a black hole. So,
Thank goodness.
Yeah. I mean, you guys follow me on Twitter. I am a proponent of not waving the white flag on offense for the catcher position. I talk about it a lot. I give me a guy that at least has a chance of being a contributor. Yan Gomes, he has had seasons. Again, catcher's tough. You get beat up. There are going to be times where your offense just isn't that great. And Gomes has had 3 or 4 seasons where he's just not been a good offensive player at all. I mean, I think he had 1 year where he was like a 40 OPS, OPS plus guy, but he's had 7, 8 seasons where he's been an average or better hitter. And
something that Barnhart has never accomplished, by the way.
Right.
He's
exactly. Yeah.
Average.
Yeah. He's had 1 year where he was like just below, just a little below average, but that was like 5 years ago.
That's in the halcyon days of the Tucker Barnhart career, being just a little bit below average was the peak.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I'm just, give me a guy that at least gives you a chance. And so I'm not a big fan of them. Yeah, go ahead.
So on that point that you're making, Miguel Amaya is only 24.
Yes.
It feels like he should be like 28 by now, right? For how long he's been on our radar.
Yeah. I mean, but, those guys, when you sign them at 16.
Yeah, those international free agent signings,
He's like, he's a year plus younger than Matt Mervis. And I didn't even know who Matt Mervis was until, a year and a half ago. So
Braylon Marquez is the same age. Javier Assad is the same age. They're all from the same IFA class.
Yeah. So he is 8 years younger than Tucker Barnhart too, which is interesting. Yeah. Now I will say in Tucker Barnhart's defense, when he first came up with Cincinnati, I thought he was going to be a guy that could contribute a little bit offensively. And as he kind of built up into that
just below average. I thought he had another step that he would have hit for a little more power. That never came, and obviously his career cratered over the last 5 years.
Sadly, he did have another step. However, it was backwards.
Yes, yeah, he had multiple steps backwards. So
well, let's take a step forward now and take a look at the week that will be for the Cubs as they are playing the Detroit Tigers as we record this podcast. They are currently leading 4-0. Tomorrow's game will have Drew Smiley pitching for the Cubs, and Wednesday, Jamison Tyone will pitch for the Cubs, and then it's off to Pittsburgh for 4 games against the Pirates before coming home to play the Milwaukee Brewers to close out the month of August. So let's get into some predictions here. This is a big road trip, big opportunity to rack up some wins against some bad teams. Let's start with you, Pat, on your prediction for the week: 3 at Detroit, 4 at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the road. The Cubs have had, very good success against Pittsburgh this year so far. The thing that gives me a bit of pause is Smiley is pitching twice this week. Assad pitches twice, and you got Taon and Steele and Hendricks each once. I'm a little bit nervous. I'll say this, by the way, just as an observation from Sunday. Kyle Hendricks seems to be, at this point of his career, a great pitcher to throw up against young, bad teams like Kansas City.
Sure.
And hopefully he'll have the similar results with Pittsburgh. He seems to have a little harder, go of it against more veteran, better hitting teams because his stuff just isn't what it used to be. But against some of these young teams, he's still crafty enough to get out. So I'm looking at this week and thinking the Tigers are really bad. Pittsburgh is pretty bad. Am I crazy in saying I think the Cubs can go? Oh, I know they can, but that the Cubs will go 5-2 on a road trip. I think that's sort of where I'm kind of coming out on this one. Which, if they did that, that would very much meet my expectations, and I think that would put them in a great place going into that Milwaukee series.
Michael,
can I say that I think they're going to go 6-1?
Please do. Yes, 6-1.
Can I say I think 6-1, but then I think they drop 2 or 3 to Milwaukee. How about that?
Yeah,
that's a 6-1 road trip. I would love to see it. I'm a little more pessimistic. I think I'm gonna.
Oh, I was hoping you'd say 7-0.
No.
I thought we were going that direction. No.
No, I do believe the 5-2. There's just. Yeah, I think it's possible that you can sweep the Tigers, but then split with Pittsburgh. There's just, I don't know, too many Smiley starts here too makes me itchy. I don't know.
Smiley's going to reward my faith in him.
Okay, so yeah,
he's going 2-0 this week.
So we've got a 6-1 and 2 5-2. So it's definitely a promising week for the Cubs on the road. That's exciting.
Can I note also that while the Brewers are at home this week, they're in the unusual situation of only playing 5 games. 2 are against Minnesota and 3 against San Diego. So they're not pushover teams by any stretch. So if the Cubs could manage to go 5-2, I see them picking up some ground such that it would be nice. Obviously, when the Cubs-Brewers series starts at the end of the month, if the Cubs were, say, 2 games back where a sweep would put them ahead and winning 2 out of 3 would bring them within 1, just something to kind of, hope for as we approach that. But I think, we've said it now for over a month. Last week and this week are the weeks when the Cubs should make some hay, right? They've got these 12 games against really bad teams. Let's win these games because despite playing some bad teams in September, they also play a lot of good teams in September. So yeah, I'd like to to take advantage of it. And I'm telling you, the Tigers are a dead man walking team, and the Pirates are not far behind. So let's go. Let's win these games.
Yeah, the Cubs are 3 games behind Milwaukee at the start of this road trip. And, yeah, you want to see them try to chip away at that going ahead of the Milwaukee coming to Chicago series. So really important.
Yeah. I was just going to say, at the deadline, I was pretty adamant that I felt like the Cubs needed to catch the Brewers because I wasn't quite as sure about the wild card race with the number of teams that were involved. And you had the Padres lurking the same way that the Cubs were, where they were clearly a good enough team to make a run. But the Padres have not made a run at all.
No,
And
they're the weirdest team. They're so bizarre.
So talented, and they've got the same like run differential as the Cubs.
They have the same record as the Mets, for God's sake. And the Mets
I know,
quit, right?
Yeah. So well, and it's
and by the way,
some of the comments, it sounds like the Padres have quit too. At least some of the players seem to think that.
The Padres are only like 2 games ahead of the Nationals. That's how bad
it's
they
crazy.
are. I mean.
Yeah, so the fact that the Padres haven't made a run, I think, opens up the wild card to maybe being a higher probability than the division. Whereas 3 weeks ago, I was flipped. I felt like the Cubs needed to catch the Brewers. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think they can make playoffs without winning the division. So
yeah, currently in the wild card spots are Philadelphia, San Francisco, and the Chicago Cubs, all with positive run differentials. Below the Cubs are Arizona, Cincinnati, and Miami, all with negative run differentials. And then you've got
Arizona's really kind of tanked the last month or so, right? I mean, they were leading that division at one point ahead of the Dodgers, and they're barely over 500 now.
Yeah, and then you've got the Padres, though, that weird team. They've got 3 teams ahead of them with negative run differentials. They're at plus 57 on their run differential for the Padres. It's absolutely
and yet they're not gonna make the playoffs.
No.
They just aren't.
Yeah. I mean, they're like six or 7 games back now.
They're
I think
6 games back, and they're 59.
And they got to jump. They'd have to jump like 3 teams as well. So yeah, I just that seems very, very unlikely. Which, like I said, that was the surprise to me. I really felt like they were going to make the Cubs, and they just haven't. So I think that more than anything has improved the Cubs' postseason chances.
And just to put an exclamation on my point about Arizona, since the beginning of July, which is not that long ago, they've had losing streaks of 4 games, 5 games, 5 games, and 9 games. Jeez. It's hard to make the playoffs when you're losing that many games in a row, and they've been doing it quite a bit.
And like I said, that's going to be the key for the Cubs. Avoid a 5-game losing streak the rest of the season. If they can avoid a 5-game losing streak the rest of the season, they're going to make the playoffs in my mind. So,
and the Cubs do play them 6 times in September, so it is a relevant, analysis.
Just you need the pitchers to, you need a starting pitcher at least once a week to step up and stop any bleeding. And whether it's Steele, whether it's Hendricks outdueling a bad offense or whatever, somebody's got to step up every week if the team is playing bad and stop.
Yeah, let's hope that the Cubs continue to make up some ground here. 6-4 in their last 10 games. Milwaukee annoyingly 7-3 in their last 10 games. So
I
really think team, by the way.
So annoying. Really
oh. I think you just got to give credit to Craig Counsell. His teams outperform expectations every single season, so he's obviously doing something right, whether it's assistance from the front office but I mean, they've switched front offices up a little bit even. So yeah, I just, for whatever reason, he gets his guys to believe. They're a team like the Cubs have been like the last few weeks where they make late game pushes and beat up on other teams' bullpens when they in games where they seem to be out of it, and all of a sudden they come back and win it. They've done that for 8 years or whatever that Counsell's been there. So
yeah,
maybe Brewers, they'll be able to. Go ahead.
They play as annoying as Craig Counsell was as a player.
As a player, yeah. There you go.
Absolutely, they're like a manifestation of his annoyance. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's just hope that he's able to continue that like Spengali magic when they move to Nashville. After their stadium gets foreclosed on, and the Cubs use it as like a workout camp for the.
Well, yeah. Now you've got the White Sox throwing their hat in the ring to move as well. So get in line. But the 2 teams that built their stadiums at the exact same time, the Milwaukee Brewers and the Chicago White Sox, built their stadiums at the same time. And
Really?
one stadium was so much more superior to the Brewers Stadium is so much better than New Comiskey Park that it's
Well,
it's
I mean, I
unbelievable.
remember Comiskey was the last one that they did before Camden Yards. Camden
Right.
Yards was the one that kind of reset the expectations for what a major league stadium is going to be in the new era. And unfortunately, the White Sox just missed out on that. But I mean, Miller Park was a few years after that, though, wasn't it? It seems like to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like that was more late 90s.
It was 1991 for the GRAT for guaranteed rate field.
I still call it Comiskey. I can't help myself.
I call it the cell, but that's
and it was 2001 was
okay.
So they're
All
10
right.
years apart.
Yeah.
So only
10 years apart.
Only 10 years apart, and you have just
Milwaukee's had 4 stadiums in that interim period, probably, or Atlanta,
yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
just unbelievable how.
If Milwaukee wants to vacate their stadium, I'd say the Cubs just play up there once a week and throw a no-hitter every time they're up there as a home game there.
Yeah. Or if it's raining really bad, they could drive up there and play.
Just drive up.
Close the roof and go on up there.
Yeah. No, it is interesting to see the financial woes. Oddly enough, it seems like there's never been a time when owners have made more money because of the internet deals and the streaming deals and all the other things going on in baseball. And yet here are 2 franchises. Yeah, gambling's the new big one, right? Gambling.
Yeah.
And yet here we have these franchises that are kind of struggling to find their footing from a stadium standpoint.
They are struggling to coax politicians and taxpayers into the same boondoggles that they did 30 years ago. It seems like, governments have gotten progressively stupider in the last 30 years, with the possible exception of, we're not going to give stadiums to billionaires anymore. And yes. I think a lot of people have wised up to not doing that. And so I think this isn't actually owners crying poor. This is owners fronting that, hey, you guys really need to help us out and build us a new stadium, blah, 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 blah. But to me, I
think the rules,
it's all PR.
The taxpayers who are paying off your old stadium should be done with that before they have to start paying your new stadium. And I think we're still under contract. I think, Jeremy, you and I are still paying taxes on to support the Cell, GRAT, New Comiskey, whatever.
You are correct.
I just would feel weird about having to pay taxes to support 2 stadiums simultaneously, one that's no longer in use and then a new one.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll get more. I don't think the White Sox will get more money just because of the weird. They're in a different situation than Milwaukee because they have that whole like ISFA lease situation where the state owns the ballpark and they're leasing it. There's 6 years remaining on that lease as I'm looking at it right now. Illinois Sports Facility Authority owns the building.
I just remember they were the team that was going to move to Miami in the late 80s when they were trying to get the new Comiskey built.
It was Miami and then it was Tampa.
That's right. Yeah. Imagine if they had ended up in those places, they still wouldn't draw anybody. Yeah.
Oh, there's some, if you look it up, there's some great stories on and things have been written about how it was a midnight deal. I think it was under Governor Thompson, where they couldn't agree on the funding for the new stadium, and they were going to leave for St. Pete or wherever they were going to go, and they basically stopped the clock in the Capitol. So everybody's
buy a little more time.
Around. Yeah, they wouldn't. Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't let the clock turn midnight. So they stopped it for like an hour, and then came to some sort of agreement where I'm sure some arms were twisted to get what we got, which wasn't so great. But I think it'll be interesting to see how both of those situations play out.
The White Sox situation to me smells like taking the temperature of what public money would look like before getting into real sale talks. So that interested parties know kind of where the state stands with
exactly.
with that.
I think it's all fronting and just testing the waters a little bit. Like you said, they've got 6 years left on their current deal.
And not to be morbid about it, but Jerry Reinsdorf is like 87 years old. I mean, they're never going to get a stadium built probably in his tenure.
Nope.
He might sell and cash out here.
And I don't know how many kids he has. I mean, I know that's that's one of the things that they've kind of talked about with the Bears is now that you're into the grandkid, you're going to be the next generation is into the grandkids. It gets split up between so many people that it's all there's so many different interests that a lot of times those families are forced to sell. Whereas I'm not sure what the situation is with the Reinsdorfs.
He has
4 children and 8 grandchildren.
Yeah, so I mean, his children have to be pretty old at this point.
They're in their
so so I mean,
and there's a Bulls franchise there, which is going to be still more valuable than the baseball.
Yes,
but
well, I mean, technically, I was born into a White Sox family, so I don't have quite the ill will towards the White Sox that some Cubs fans do. My first major league games I was brought to White Sox games, not the Cubs games. My dad was from the South Side, so.
Well, they did a pretty poor job of keeping you. That's all I can say.
I mean, honestly, this is something that I didn't even find out until I was like 10 years old. But yeah, it was
you were a White Sox fan.
Yeah, I mean, I was taken to games as as a baby to White Sox games, but my family moved out to the suburbs before I was born. And my older brother and all of his friends were Cubs fans, and so by the time I was born and came up, we were a Cubs family. I guess my dad didn't care enough to push any White Sox things on it. So I do also remember he was also very seventh inning of a game. Hey, we won't beat the traffic.
Oh, yep.
So I think that might have been part. Hey, I'm not really a Cubs fan. Whereas me and my brother were like, "What? We're not leaving. What are you talking about?"
So did they sit you down and tell you the news? It's like you must have been like, "Are you going to tell me I'm adopted?" They're like, no, it's worse.
No. My brother mentioned it in passing one day, and I'm like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah, you didn't know that?" And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. He was like, yeah, think about it. Where was Dad from? I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't really
like having a rare blood disease and then finding out later on in life.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad that you are a Cubs fan, and at this time of the show, we are wrapping it up. So let's have you tell the other Cub fans that are listening to this show where they can find your work and how they can follow you on Twitter or X or whatever we call it today.
I'm just calling it Twitter. It's kind of like Comiskey. I'm never doing that. MJ_Ernst on Twitter. That's basically where I do most of my stuff at this point. Not running Cubs Den anymore. So, And
you're gonna be covering the Hawks?
Yeah, definitely. I still do my podcast with Sean during the season, not during the off season, but yeah, that'll be coming back. I mean, maybe this off season I'll either create a new website or join up somewhere else to do some baseball writing next year. But I really just wanted to take this year off and kind of devote a little more time to the Hawks and kind of recharge my batteries a little bit. Didn't do near as much minor league stuff this year as I've done over the last 5 or 6 years, especially after the All-Star break and the trade deadline, where I was like, hey, the Cubs are trying. It's just like, you know what? I want to actually watch the major league team on a daily basis. I don't want to spend 4 hours watching minor league baseball and writing about minor league baseball. I want to actually kind of enjoy this ride. So I've been doing that, but yeah, maybe next year I'll get back into the writing thing.
Well,
Good job with the Hawks on the draft, by the way.
Oh, thank you. That was it's fun for me.
Is that your idea?
Yeah, definitely. I'm I'm a big hockey fan. That's the one sport where I've always kind of been able to separate the writing from the, just the hockey for me has always been fun, and any commenting and stuff I do on it has just purely been out of enjoyment. And if anybody listens to it, great. If they don't, whereas with baseball and that, with the amount of writing that I did in the past and stuff, I think a little bit of the joy got sucked out of it at times. Like I do remember back in 2016, I had such a good feeling about the team where like I told John, I was like, I don't want to do much writing. I just want to watch and enjoy this. So like 2016, I really didn't do much writing. And, and then unfortunately he got sick the next year. And so I kind of picked up more and more. And I kind of burned myself out a little bit there. So this year's been more about re-energizing, having fun again. So doing that.
Well, Michael, it's always a joy and fun when we have you on the podcast. Thanks again for coming on. You can
thanks for having me.
And anyone who's listening can follow us on all of the social medias at Wrigleyville Nat. That's X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads. We're everywhere at Wrigleyville Nat. The Patreon is how we stay ad-free. Patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. Thanks to all of our patrons. If you want to support the show, every dollar helps. It goes right back into the show, helps us continue to be ad-free, 5 seasons strong now, so thanks to all of our patrons. And if you can't support the show financially, please tell your Cub fan friends about the show. Cub fans know other Cub fans. Show them how to subscribe to the podcast. Get them out there listening to us. Spread the word. The word of mouth is a great way to support the show as well. Or leaving the 5-star reviews on whatever podcatcher of choice you're listening on. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time.